Good evening. The British nationality order has been tabled in Parliament in London, while in Hong Kong details of the points system for passport package were unveiled simultaneously. As Carolyn Libby reports, even those with only a few hundred points could get a passport.
Eager applicants can pick up the first forms on December 1st and must submit them by the February 28th deadline. Few changes were made to the scheme, which splits applicants into 4 different categories, including 36,000 in a general occupational category, 7,000 from the disciplined services, 6,300 from a sensitive services class, and 500 from the entrepreneurs class. Scores will be calculated on the basis of points earned in each of 7 categories, including age, experience, education, special circumstances, proficiency in English, British links, and community service. Age will be a critical factor. Applicants aged between 30 and 41 will rack up the most points. Old age and citizenship in a country outside Hong Kong or China will act as a strike against applicants, with people over 61 and those with other passports getting 200 points slashed off their scores. The Director of Administration, Donald Tsang, expects that 300,000 people will apply, many of whom will be civil servants.
We expect that about 30 to 40% of total beneficiaries will be civil servants. It will not be. It very much depends who are going to apply under this scheme and how many civil servants are going to apply this scheme in relation to a number of private sector applicants.
Mr. Tsang points out that even people who only have a couple hundred points may get a passport, depending on the scores of other people in their category. The first passports are expected to be available in July or August.
The AMELCO working group studying the nationality package has told members of the administration that it's their task to make sure people understand how to apply for a passport under the package. The visiting Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew has urged Hong Kong people to maintain cordial relations with China. Nick Mould reports.
The striking of a realistic relationship with Beijing, said Mr. Lee, would never come out of political argument. Instead of confronting the regime, Hong Kong should use another premise.
You have the right, under the agreement they have reached with Britain, to leave Hong Kong at any time you wish, because the Hong Kong limited passport is valid.
Should the territory's top professionals choose to exercise that right simultaneously, it would, Mr. Lee said, send a clear message to the mainland.
I will prove to 1,100 million Chinese why democracy has brought prosperity, options, not just consumer options, but political options, lifestyle options for 5.5 billion people of Hong Kong, and therefore you 1,100, or by then 1,150 million people in China, should draw the moral from that.
Mr. Lee's calls for realism came amongst an attack on the foreign press in Hong Kong. He accused it of fostering excessive optimism about the 1984 agreement governing the handover of sovereignty to China, and excessive pessimism following the military crackdown in Beijing last June. His message, however, was further reinforced by the Deputy Governor, Sir David Ford. Also addressing the Commonwealth Press Union, Sir David said mutual understanding will be essential if the concept of one country, two systems is to work.
Certainly Hong Kong people are very pragmatic about their relationship with China and have no wish to confront her. The underlying key to the success of that relationship, and it has been successful despite some highly publicized differences, the underlying key has been the recognition by all concerned of the immense mutual benefit to be gained from a prosperous Hong Kong making a significant contribution to the modernization of China.
The first day of talks between Chinese and Hong Kong experts on the new airport has ended with both sides saying their discussions had been fruitful. Fanny Fong reports.
The first day of talks lasted until this evening, but both sides refused to disclose details. The spokesman of the Chinese team, Luo Jiahuan, said it was a good briefing, while the Secretary for Economic Services, Anson Chen, described today's meeting as a good start. The talks began this morning, as mainland officials were still attacking Hong Kong for making sudden changes to the airport plan, just days before the meeting of experts. But Sir David Ford, who chaired the morning session, emerged with a positive note.
We've had a very useful and a very friendly start to these talks. We're looking forward to them very much indeed, and we'll be coming to talk to you towards the end of the week.
Overseas, world leaders, including American President Mr. Bush and Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Kaifu, have sent congratulatory messages to the Soviet leader Mr. Gorbachev, who's just been awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Mr. Gorbachev was honoured for his leading role in promoting harmony between the East and the West.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the 1990 Nobel Peace Prize to Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, President of the Soviet Union, for his leading role in the peace process, which today characterizes important part of the international community. During the last few years, dramatic changes have taken place in the relationship between East and West. Confrontation has been replaced by negotiations. All European nation states have regained their freedom.
In Moscow, Mr. Gorbachev said his award reflected the success of his perestroika reform policies. He also said he was very touched over having been singled out for the award. He said he would go to Oslo on December the 10th to accept the prize. Baghdad has said its people are very anxious to respond to any threat of war. The strongly worded statement was apparently in response to comments from British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd, who said Iraq could be forced out of Kuwait at the point of a gun. Meanwhile, a three-day Congress of Kuwaiti politicians in Saudi Arabia has ended, with reports that the exiled leadership and the opposition have agreed on measures to recover their country.
Even though critics of the government are also taking part, the Emir made the agenda very clear.
It is incumbent upon us at this conference to set our minds on boundless cooperation in order to achieve our ultimate supreme goal, which is the liberation of our country.
But it's what happens afterwards that concerns many who mill around here. For there's recently been much criticism of the ruling family's control over every aspect of life in Kuwait. In response, the Crown Prince has now publicly promised to restore the constitution and elected parliament.
People's participation and by further democracy, which has always been an objective for which we are working.
Even critics who came here expecting to be disappointed say the prince's promise paved the way for change.
There is no way to go back to the old system. There is no way. The people, they are determined. The people outside Kuwait, and more so the people under occupation.
Women, too, were determined. They won't show their faces, but they are not afraid to raise their voices. They began the resistance movement in Kuwait, and now it appears to be paying off.
Left-wing parties have announced that they'll challenge the cabinet's rejection of a UN team to investigate last week's killing of Palestinians in Jerusalem. The announcement came as a spokesman for the Israeli government said the decision to reject the UN mission was irreversible.
More than 1 million Palestinians in the occupied territories were confined to their homes for the 6th day in a row. Still, it was quiet. Police kept things quiet in Jerusalem, too, where tourists prowled the old city's alleyways in relative serenity. In fact, the only real noise today came from the Israeli cabinet meeting, where ministers loudly and unanimously rejected the UN and its team of investigators appointed to probe Monday's deadly violence.
The Israeli government will have nothing to do with it. It has refused to meet any one of the members of this delegation.
The Israeli committee investigating the incident met for the first time today, and while it can only make non-binding recommendations, officials say that's better than the UN idea.
They already condemned Israel, they already issued a verdict, so what's left for discussion here?
Plenty, according to a left-wing Israeli human rights group, which says the Israeli government is wrong to call the police innocent.
Shooting by security forces was indiscriminate, a way by which you can't possibly be very exact regarding your targets.
The Palestinians aren't very exact on why they threw stones at Jewish worshippers. They say they were protecting their mosque, but hardly anyone believes it was actually in jeopardy. Adding to the confusion is the changing Israeli government's story of who was behind the bloodshed. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Shamir pointed at the PLO. But today, on This Week with David Brinkley, Defense Minister Moshe Aaron said something different.
I think it was a clear-cut case of Muslim fundamentalism running wild.
Locally, KMB says there may be another rise in bus fares as the Gulf crisis continues to push oil prices up. Ursula Malone reports.
KMB says the Gulf crisis has so far added more than $20 million to its running costs, with the price of diesel leapfrogging in a matter of weeks from $4.20 a litre to $5.05. Bus companies have been forced to take another look at their sums. In KMB's case, this has already resulted in an application for higher fares.
We have just submitted our plan. We have to talk to Transport Department on the details, and it's premature to say when we need or how much we need to increase the fares.
What is certain is that the 2.6 million passengers who use KMB buses every day can expect to be paying more in the not-too-distant future.
Members of the Institute of Surveyors have joined forces with those opposing the amendment to the Town Planning Ordinance. A public outcry caused the debate on the amendment, scheduled for this month, to be put off. The amendment is intended to restrict land use in the new territories to prevent Hong Kong's remaining farming land from being turned into an unsightly junk heap or storage block like this. But chartered surveyor Trevor Farnworth claims the government is overreacting.
I think the present amendment bill is taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. There are simpler enactments that could be used which would control the open storage and allied uses in the rural areas.
He says the bill not only restricts the rights of rural land users but urban dwellers as well. They'll both lose the right to legal recourse if they find they've been hard done by the proposed provisions. Financial compensation has also been ruled out for people whose livelihood is threatened by the changes. The surveyors have called on the government to scrap the amendment and redraft a new law that covers just the new territories. A lorry driver has been miraculously saved by his sweater after his vehicle plunged over the side of a flyover. Ursula Malone has the details.
The drama began shortly before 5 this morning when the goods truck jackknifed close to the Shing Mun tunnel, hurtling the cab across the parapet of the flyover. The 25-year-old driver was left hanging from the mangled vehicle by only his clothes. Firemen attached to ropes were lowered over the side of the flyover. This was the moment when the driver's clothes were untangled before he was lowered to waiting medical teams. The injured man was then carried up a steep embankment and hoisted back over the parapet before being rushed to hospital. The driver is now making a good recovery and is reported to be in a fair condition.
World-famous conductor and composer Leonard Bernstein has died of a heart attack in New York at the age of 72. Mr. Bernstein was forced to give up public performances just last week because of poor health.
He was, without a doubt, one of America's music giants. Conductor, composer, writer, teacher, Leonard Bernstein was everywhere on the stage of life. This was Bernstein with what he liked to call my orchestra, rehearsing with the New York Philharmonic in 1988. Bernstein would graciously accept honors, but did not like to look ahead, such as when he received a Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement.
When I was first offered it, I said no, because it offers you an award for the achievement of a lifetime, which implies that one's lifetime is over. And I don't wish myself dead yet. I'm just beginning, folks.
Bernstein excelled in classical and popular music.
And finally, the weather. It'll be fine tonight and tomorrow. Temperatures will be in the range of 24 to 28 degrees. That's all for tonight from the ATV News team. Good night.